Okay, so attendee number will start going up, and going to give everyone a few minutes to filter into the room, and we'll get started shortly, maybe a minute or two after. And okay, welcome everyone. Just going to give everyone another minute or so to filter into the room here, into the Zoom room, before we go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So we'll get started here in just a minute. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started for today. Welcome everyone. My name is Scott Stewart. I'm the Executive Director of the Millennium Park Foundation here in Chicago, Illinois. Thank you all for joining us today for this, what I hope will be a very interesting webinar, a peek behind the curtain, so to say, of how the city of Chicago and Millennium Park executes on a lot of its arts and culture programming. Before we get into today's webinar and I introduce today's panelists, there's just a few housekeeping pieces of information I wanted to share. I wanted to remind everyone, if possible, to remain on mute. Questions that may come up, there will be time for questions here at the end of our discussion. Questions that do come up, please feel free to fire those off into the Q&A chat box, and we'll take a look at those, curate those, and as we have time here at the end of today's session, we'll pose those to the panelists. So we did want to give certainly a thank you and a huge shout out to World Urban Parks. For those of you, hopefully most of you are already members of World Urban Parks. If not, I strongly encourage you to become members of the organization. I have found it to be an amazing organization with an amazing group of people that are incredibly action and mission oriented. So huge shout out to everyone at World Urban Parks. If you're unfamiliar with the organization, please go to the website, take a look at it, and certainly hopefully join. We are here in the North American region, spread out and representative across the entire United States and Canada. You see the little green arrows there indicate where some of our respective member organizations, member parks might be. So you see we have a pretty broad representation across North America. Also wanted to give a little shout out to Parks Audit, an online app tool that really helps parks and public spaces to refine some practices and measure some team performance against other peer parks and public spaces. they've been very generous in actually supporting and sponsoring the webinar series. So we thank them and encourage all of you to certainly come and go and check them out as well. Also wanted to do a little preview for everyone of the next webinar on measuring parks or measuring park use to better understand your system. Obviously, this is a topic that all of us are very interested in, is how do we use real-time data to improve our park systems, our parks, and our visitor experience. So hopefully you'll join some wonderful colleagues from Auckland, wonderful colleagues from the City Parks Alliance, as well as the Seattle City Parks and Recreation, and sharing their experiences in using real data to better understand their parks and their park systems. So with that, I do want to roll right into today's webinar. Millennium Park is the foundation to Chicago's arts and culture landscape, and I'm very lucky to have three amazing professionals that I have the real pleasure of working with on a daily basis here in Millennium Park, as well as across the city of Chicago. Aaron Harkey, Ann Hickey, and Maggie Hooper. I'll let them introduce themselves here in just a moment. But the three of them work for Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, which is here in Chicago, the fun department for the city of Chicago that plans and executes all of the arts and culture activities across the city, including Millennium Park. So very lucky to have the three of them join us today to talk about, from their respective positions within the Department of Cultural Affairs, or DCASE, within DCASE, how the, I always like to say, I guess, the sausage is made of the arts and culture landscape of Chicago. So let me do just a quick bit of switching here so everyone can see our panelists. All right, and with that, what I'd like to ask each of the panelists to do is just spend a couple of minutes introducing yourselves and tell everyone about your role with the Department of Cultural Affairs. Aaron, let's go ahead and start with you.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks for inviting us to this conversation. We're really happy to be here. I'm Aaron Harkey. I am the first Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, which means that I oversee a lot of really fun things. So I manage the department and I oversee our team, basically, and I have a lot of interface, obviously, with our facilities functions, our development functions, or fundraising functions, and that's a specific relationship because I recently promoted from the Deputy of Programming, so I also work very, very closely with our programming team to curate our programs at Millennium Park, but also to develop programs in neighborhoods throughout the city. So I have a fun job. I feel really blessed, but thanks for being here. Really happy to be here.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. Maggie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Maggie Hooper. I am the Deputy Commissioner for our Partnerships Division. So within my division are three teams: our corporate partners, our fundraising and development team that both fundraises for public and private dollars, and then our grant making team, which has a pretty advanced participatory model for grant making out to individual artists and to arts organizations and nonprofit organizations doing arts programming, both big and small. And thank you for having us all here.
Excellent, thanks, Maggie. And Ann, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Scott, and thanks to everybody for having us here. I think you can already tell that all three of us wear multiple hats. I am actually the Deputy Commissioner of Facilities for DCASE, so I'm responsible for overseeing the contract for operations and maintenance of Millennium Park and program support at the park, as well as the adjacent Chicago Cultural Center and a few other facilities. In addition, I oversee the City Markets program, which is composed of the Chicago's farmers markets, as well as something called our Maxwell Street Market. I'm responsible kind of for the overall coordination with all of the events that take place in the park and the contract that offers program support of these events. This includes DK's programs, resident orchestra, cultural partners, as well as revenue generating events that are very important for us. And I also manage the relationships and associated contracts with the park. Millennium Park Foundation, so I get to work with Scott a lot, and through them, Laurie Garden. The Harris Theater for Music and Dance, which is kind of a below ground performance venue that shares backstage with us. And Park Grill Restaurant, which is a restaurant as well as provides concessions. And I wanted to provide a little bit of overview of that because that really factors into a lot of the support that is offered in the park. So there you go. Thanks again.
Excellent, and yes, certainly. I mean, I know Aaron and Maggie and Ann well, and have a chance to work with them on a daily basis. And I think we could spend our entire webinar time just individually talking about what you each do, because as many of us, I'm sure, know, many of the participants today, I mean, municipal organizations, governmental organizations, we all wear a number of hats. And I will say that this team is, and I think you'll see through the course of this webinar, this team is, I feel, one of the best teams when it comes to arts and culture. Arts and culture work in anywhere in the U.S. or in North America. I think this will be a really exciting conversation. And before I do forget, I did want to just say a really brief blurb. I would not be a good executive director if I forgot to say anything about Millennium Park Foundation. So I'm the executive director of Millennium Park Foundation, and Millennium Park Foundation is a nonprofit organization that over the last 20 plus years has partnered with the city of Chicago, originally to raise the $460 million to build Millennium Park, to raise that in the private sector, to build Millennium Park, as well as an additional several tens of, or several, I want to say about 40 or $50 million worth of permanent endowments now to help maintain and operate certain areas or elements of Millennium Park. The relationship between the foundation and the city of Chicago through Department of Cultural Affairs is somewhat unique among other public-private partnerships. We were kind of it's an interesting hybrid. I'm sure some of which will come out in today's conversations. But it's an interesting relationship. I think a very positive relationship that's resulted in a wonderful place here in Millennium Park, and a number of very exciting arts and culture programming, which is really what I want to kind of dive into right away. So I think the way I've got this set up is I have a few prompted sort of questions that we will all sort of dive into with the panelists. And then, of course, any questions that you all as participants have, please drop into the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll maybe pepper those around a little bit as well. So I think the first sort of ideas I wanted to tackle was specifically to Millennium Park. So Millennium Park is 17, 18 years old at this point. And many of us here in Chicago remember the park being built. Some of you all were various roles with the city and such, maybe along the way of seeing the park built and such as well. But let's look at like maybe the past 5 years. Have been pretty tumultuous 5 years for any of us in arts and culture, and any of us in parks and public space. It's been a pretty wild ride over the last 5 years, particularly the last maybe 3 or 4 even. So today, given the drive for particularly diversity, equity, and inclusion in public spaces, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how that has changed here at Millennium Park, how your thinking of Millennium Park and what Millennium Park brings to Chicago has changed over the last 5 years or so. Aaron, I kind of wanted to start with you because this is kind of a programming heavy question. So Aaron, would you like to speak a bit to that?
Sure. Well, I think you kind of alluded a little bit to it in the title of this presentation, right? It's kind of thinking about Millennium Park as a foundational asset rather than a standalone entity. We have the benefit of an extraordinary audience. Pre-pandemic, we had an audience of 20 million annually. Lots of people come to the park. And so we try to think about, I think, Millennium Park attendees as cultural consumers. And as cultural consumers, we really try to encourage them to not just stop at Millennium Park, but to continue to explore culture and to continue to explore culture, I think, specifically in our neighborhoods. All of the traditional festivals that the city has historically produced in the park now also have, significant neighborhood program components. So, programs like house and gospel and jazz, now also are, their experiences for people to gain access to in neighborhoods. So it creates this really nice, I think, dialogue, right, between cultural programs in neighborhoods and the park that helps to, expand audience, I think, all the way around. We've also opened up the stage to local organizations. A lot of them are cultural heritage presenters, that are keepers of, important kind of legacy, cultural legacy, presentation. And I think that helps obviously to diversify our audience, but also gives these organizations like more significant reach and broader exposure, right? Using the kind of Millennium Park platform. I'd also like to just kind of mention that 70% of the artists that we book and partner with in Millennium Park through DCASE are artists of color. It's something that we're really proud of. It's like a right and good thing. And I think it's important to us that we continue and in every way communicate that this park is for everyone. And that is for, both access to, performing, those that are performing, and also those that are, attending. So we try to really think about, how to be as inclusive as possible in terms of access and how to really leverage the asset, right, to support culture more broadly.
Excellent. Thanks, Erin. And I guess I should mention, just as a bit of context, one of the, I shouldn't say one, but the sort of the founding philosophies of Millennium Park, when it was maybe ideas in people's heads or sketches on napkins, was really to create a public arts and culture space for all Chicagoans and for all visitors to Chicago that was in perpetuity, free, open, and accessible. So all of those programs Erin was just referencing are actually offered free for everyone here at Millennium Park. And speaking of free, that's an excellent transition into, well, if they're free, how do we pay for those? That's Maggie's job. No, that's one of Maggie's jobs. So
that's all of our jobs.
Yeah, it is.
Real about it.
It is. Let's just be real. It is all of our jobs. How do you turn a free park into a revenue generating park? Because we've got to. And partnerships and corporate sponsorships and such are a big part of that. So Maggie, could you speak a bit to that role that you and your team have, but then and also in how you develop those relationships and those partnerships that result in funding opportunities, be them sponsorships or grants or whatever they might be, that further support Erin and her programming team's work in that diversity and inclusiveness push within our program.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a funny, unique quirk of Chicago's setup, all of our corporate sponsorship revenue actually goes to a very separate corporate fund. So none of that revenue directly supports enhancements or even basic budget line items. So we do, while we need that revenue to meet obligations to the mayor's office and to the city, we do also spend a significant amount of time in looking to both cultivate and generate new partnerships with public donors, philanthropic support specifically, because grant dollars are used and can be directed through a given grant agreement, as well as the budget that the city allocates to our grant making team. So our cultural grants out to the community, interestingly, does not include the city's budget for museum grants, which typically in most cities is sort of the biggest chunk. In Chicago, those go out through a museum in the park at the Park District. So our focus is really more on those sort of on the ground level organizations and artists, and making sure that we're doing that both with a participatory model, but then with numerous methodologies applied after a panel chooses to ensure geographical and cultural diversity. That being said, I think that Anne actually manages the big chunk of the money that funds most of the programming. We sort of seek to bring in whatever extra we can for any number of reasons, and to do it in a way that both supports the DCASE's goals, but also the goals of the grantee organizations, to ensure that they are able to do the programming that they design. And I think that's a really important element of equity and inclusion, is ensuring that the people that are making the art for a various community are able to make those decisions and not be sort of dictated to. So it's sort of a nice opportunity to cover all of our bases, if you will.
Yeah, and thank you, Maggie. I will also I'll add, with Maggie and I have had many a lengthy and occasionally, I wouldn't call them heated conversations, but strong conversations between the two of us about, about that balance that we try to strike here at Millennium Park, as I'm sure many of our participant organizations try to strike, between corporate sponsorship and the negative impacts of potential commercialization of an arts and culture space and the programming that happens within that space. And I will say that's always, as I'm sure Maggie can attest to, it's always a little bit of back and forth, because we do have to pay the bills and make sure things happen. I
always dread sending the email. It'll sit in my drafts for a few hours. I'm like, oh, it's gonna hate it.
yeah,
we all have to do our job, so
there is always a little bit of that. But I will say, one of the things that I think that has been struck here at Millennium Park, and that is a real success, I think, story, is that balance between integrating corporate sponsorship that is sometimes can be a bit of a slippery slope and can be a bit of a sort of a sticky subject for some public spaces. But integrating the values of corporate sponsorship into what is otherwise a free and relatively commercial-less public space that really is designed and meant to focus on the beauty, the action, the vibrancy of the art and the artists, and not be detracted from by sort of a gross commercialization of the space or of the art or of the artists and such. And I think that's a real testament to the way DCASE has a vision for what happens not only here in Millennium Park, but really across the city of Chicago. It's been a real success story. So Anne, I want to turn to you to talk about from a facilities role, from a nuts and bolts role. It's a bit of a tougher question for you in a way, because you're the one that makes it happen on the ground. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and actually, I'm kind of glad you left me last, just because it made me realize, as Erin and Maggie are talking, that I'm kind of the one that this all culminates with, and kind of the mediator in between all of it. I'm ultimately responsible for keeping the integrity of the park, but also generating revenue and keeping priority on cultural programs, and I wanted to, I can't remember who exactly said it, but I mean, I think it's shown about the role, how the role has changed, especially in DCASE about how funding goes towards supporting programming. So just as kind of an example, I have a budget annually of $9 million for the park, and that is for everything, maintenance, operations, everything like that. Over the course of the years, I was talking with my colleague, and in 2019, we probably spent about $1 million of that to go towards supporting programming. And that is a direct reflection of things that have happened over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, with our commissioner now and our previous commissioner, the role of Millennium Park in providing an opportunity for diverse programs has really changed. Millennium Park was created with the intention of having the Grant Park Music Festival there, which is an absolutely wonderful free amenity for people to come enjoy. But with the new commissioners that came on, they recognized that we really needed to expand the opportunity for both cultural programs to be showcased there, and then also for more people to feel welcome with the diversified programming. So more and more kind of started going towards it. So it's my job to do that. And quite frankly, just manage the overall calendar for it. Because we also have some private events, which is my least favorite email to send, Scott, when a private event wants to come in and do a concert. Although when it's somebody like a Wilco or someone like that, you have to be happy about it. But we do need to have those as well. Those revenue generating actually do go back towards our budget. So it's important to have. So, I mean, I guess that's my kind of quick answer when we're talking about that discussion on kind of how I keep all of those parts together.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Ann. Thanks. And some of you that are participating today, you may have picked up on occasionally and we have good fun with it, the relationship between the Millennium Park Foundation and Department of Cultural Affairs is always one of give and take. And I actually think that has been part of the equation for Millennium Park's success and the programming successes that we have had here in the park is that unlike many other public spaces, arts and culture spaces, parks, what may be, Millennium Park has both the city organization that is programming and trying, executing and operating and maintaining the park, but there is also this nonprofit entity that has a tremendous stake in the park, both from its original construction, but then also its ongoing operation and assisting with funding and supporting programs and capital projects and so forth in the park. That is one of my previous, unfortunately now deceased board members used to say, we at the foundation get to play the role of the squeaky wheel with a little bit of money. And I think that's actually to an extent been one of the reasons that we've been very successful is that we have a give and take, a push back between the foundation and the city. And what that's done is elevated all of our gains, basically. It's made us all strive for something much greater than sort of mediocrity or something here at Millennium Park. So you all will certainly see a flavor of that. And I think that is one of the interesting keys to success here. I wanted to shift gears though, just a little bit. And I mentioned this earlier, sort of, how the sausage is made sort of scenario. Because I think for many of our attendees today, this is really where it gets really interesting is peek behind the curtain and how do these things actually happen? How do these arts and culture activities, how does Millennium Park work? How do these arts and culture activities work? How do they actually, happen in the space? Each of you lead very different divisions or departments within the Department of Cultural Affairs, but you all are obviously working very closely together. So I would be very curious to hear, and if you could talk a little bit about sort of how you collaborate to ensure that cultural programming, it's properly curated for a place like Millennium Park, that it has a location in the park that works for it, and that it is properly funded. that it's properly supported. So I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to that. Anne, I'm going to come right back to you. And if you could talk a little bit about, from a facilities perspective, about how you make that all work.
Sure. And I think the quick answer is lots and lots of meetings. We talk quite a bit, and I know Scott's involved in a lot of these meetings too, but it is really important to continuously be on the same page. It really does start with identifying a vision and priorities. Thankful Erin's in her new role, because that, the vision and priorities are starting to really be solidified more, and our commissioner as well. So I think making sure that we know what our mayor's vision is, because when it comes down to it, we are a government entity, and what the priorities are. For me, honestly, going to the strict facilities of things, properly funded is my biggest. There is, and I think I alluded to this, there's a desire to have more funding go towards supporting programming, which I am very, very much in favor with, and I will give all that I can. But the park is now 16, 17 years old and in need of some desperate maintenance. So how do we come up with that money? How do we create opportunities for revenue generating events without having it go overboard? How do we partner with Millennium Park Foundation? Scott and I are having continuous conversations with this. And this is where Maggie and in times Erin come in as well. How do we identify new roles and new opportunities for funders to come in and help support us, either by supplementing the programming or by supplementing, quite frankly, fixing things in the park. And then, also when it gets down to the nitty gritty, I'm the one that oversees the contract that supports all of these activities that take place. So quite frankly, making sure that they're doing their job well, trying to identify cost efficiencies, but also making sure that the contractors that we have out there are appropriately supporting the festivals and events that we have.
Excellent, thanks, Anne. And Anne and I talk, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a day sometimes about that exact thing. And I'm sure many of you attendees that are, or the participants say, face the same things, where your public spaces are being asked to do so much more, and things they were never necessarily designed for or intended for, but being asked to do so much more. I think that's really become a highlight, particularly in the last year with the COVID pandemic and such, and being, public spaces, parks being asked to do so much more there. Constant battle certainly here at Millennium Park as well. Maggie, I want to turn to you now. Talk a little bit about how you and your team, from a partnerships and funding standpoint, work with Erin and Anne to make the Millennium Park magic happen.
Yeah, well, I think that a big part of the success of any of the cultural programming that takes place is the team that Erin put together. Our programmers, them each individually, has this breadth of expertise and insights and commitment to the work that I think is really unparalleled. And they really do play that role of curation and of identifying the right folks to come in, whether it's as a performing artist, as a visual artist, as public art, whatever the case might be. And we do struggle to strike that balance between a strong case for support. So as we all know, the back end of funding many of these programs has a lot of technical aspects. It has a lot of unsexy, if you will, type of funding that needs to happen in order to functionally execute on any of them. So I think that we, for better or worse, do tend to focus a little bit more on enhancing that programming, or sort of the more visible side of those costs, and just cross our fingers that the programming team and Anne's team, between their budgets, can cover sort of those basic costs. And we've also really, I think, increased our partnership with the foundation, with the Millennium Park Foundation, over the last 2 years. I know that in various municipalities that there might be a conservatorship, or, you know, it can look any number of ways, but typically those public-private partnerships where you're able to sort of not be so transactional and come together at the mission and vision level. Again, there's always going to be companies that want to put a 20-foot blow up chicken in Millennium Park or whatever. I don't even send Scott those emails. Now I know where to sort of draw the line. And that's because those relationships have been really built out. And I think that we've started doing a better job in partnership with Scott of communicating out to his board and hearing from them as well, and sort of integrating the various places that all of those pieces intersect. The biggest problem I think that we come up with in the fundraising capacity is doing programming we wouldn't otherwise do because someone wants to fund it. And that's true of literally every government agency. Someone wants to give you a big check to do something, you kind of just want to, and nonprofit sector, quite frankly. So I think we do really do a great job of not drifting down that path, and really staying strategic and focused on where it is appropriate and when it is best to bring in those philanthropic dollars in a way that that complements and enhances the work that the programming team does.
Excellent. Thanks, Maggie.
Can I add a quick bit
Yeah.
just about sponsorship, just because I've worked in sponsorship, hasn't been probably as big of a role, but in recent years, I do want to identify that we do work very closely with the sponsorship team under Maggie for each of these events that take place to really identify opportunities, identifying what the demographics are going to be, identifying what the attendance is going to be, identifying food and beverage sponsors, trying to figure out how to match potential sponsors. I mean, grants and everything is one way, but sponsorship has always been important to DCASE in figuring out how to associate it with the events that do take place in the park and bring in that additional revenue. And I just did want to acknowledge that too, that part of it.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. Thanks, Maggie. Aaron, I want to turn to you. Talk a bit about the collaborative process from your perspective.
Well, I think this year is kind of a good case study for that. There was a lot of stuff that we are still figuring out, but had to figure out. And just picking up on something Maggie said, I think it is challenging, right, to deliver programs free to the public in terms of what that means to your kind of revenue generating potential. There also is a benefit to that because you can always do the right thing. And so we can, we're not driven by what's popular, we're driven by like what's right. And so we spent a lot of time going into this season thinking a lot about how to responsibly transition our audiences back to the park, and how to, again, leverage this opportunity to, oh, sweet boy, how to leverage this opportunity to really help, get artists working again, musicians working again, get organizations working again. And so, we really prioritized in the curation this year, Chicago artists and Chicago organizations, making sure that there's employment opportunities there, right, for our immediate sector. And so we started to think, early, trying to project, what are all the ways that we can kind of, responsibly, again, get people back into the park. So the programming team kind of came up with some scenarios on the direction of, me and the commissioner really helping to set the vision. And then the programming team comes back with some scenarios that we then kind of present to Ann for her kind of, feasibility analysis. Our budget, like a lot of cultural organizations, cultural local arts agencies across the country, is entirely dependent on tourism revenue, which of course was next to nothing during the pandemic. So even the money that we, typically relied on, and that Anne has in her, budget to support the, park isn't there, right? So we need to kind of use, we need to be really smart about where we're going to invest our time and our energy with the kind of limited resources that we have in this moment. So, it becomes a conversation with Anne. Anne is like doing her job and obviously, freaked out because it's going to cost, X amount of dollars. And then we try to manipulate that, get it to the right size. And then that's where Maggie comes in, when we start to identify where there are gaps, where Maggie and you really come in, right, to help us see where we can, get some additional support. So it's ongoing. I think to Anne and Maggie's point, we meet constantly. We've been meeting even more constantly just because the landscape is changing day by day in terms of what we're allowed and permitted to do. And I have to say, Anne has done an absolutely extraordinary job in setting the park up for success this year in terms of the, plans that she has to make sure that we can return safely. So it's a lot this year, but we had to, really kind of work together to make sure that we could do this in the right way.
Excellent. Thanks, Erin. I want to take a moment and sort of shift some gears. There we go. A couple of questions have been coming in that I think would be wonderful to have you all respond to. First is a little bit of a nuts and bolts sort of question. Design consultants, artists that are looking to work with municipal agencies to develop, plans, exhibitions and such. From your perspectives, this might be a little bit more of a Anne Aaron question, but from your perspectives, what kind of advice would you give for them to be the most successful in approaching you all as a governmental organization and having an opportunity to collaborate?
I mean, having a compelling program is really important, and the feasibility of it is really important too, like knowing how much it's going to cost. And we, and Maggie can speak to this, we intake any partnership, almost any partnership, most partnerships, in terms of a if we're not reaching out to you to partner, a non-solicited request will go through a grant making program. So it'll be, we don't typically take just solicitations from people that are not invited. So just because we're government, transparency. So, having a really compelling narrative, a feasible, real budget to your project, we will completely, dismiss anything if it doesn't look like it's actually possible for the amount of money that you said. And then the real technical expertise is required. So if you do not personally have all the skills, it's important that you build that team around you to be able to execute the program. So I think, expertise, can you really deliver? Do you have the technical, not only the creative, but the technical capacity to deliver the program or the exhibition or whatever it is? Is your project feasible from a budget standpoint? And is it, is the narrative compelling? And I think we've already articulated that, we prioritize, underrepresented stories and histories in our programming.
And to add to what Erin was saying, the reality is we are a government agency, and we don't have a lot of opportunities on a specific basis. Because, for example, a lot of them have to go through an RFP process. But I think what Erin's alluding to, and what honestly under Mark and Erin's leadership we're seeing more of, is more of like a call for artists or call for opportunities to kind of give people, you know, an opportunity to participate and things like that. So depending on kind of what you're talking about, you know, Scott, for example, for landscape development, things like that, an RFP process may not be part of it, but you know, one of the programs I know that you and Aaron collaborated on was a sound installation in the Pritzker Pavilion. That was kind of a unique way to bring in a different type of expertise into the park that wouldn't actually have been done before. So I think that creating some of these collaborations and opportunities for people that don't fit within you know, our traditional RFP process is what I think, you know, where we find an out to create new things in the park.
Excellent, excellent. Maggie, did you have anything you wanted to add before I've got another question in the hopper here? So
Nope.
okay. So Maggie's, I'm staying away from that. No.
I'm excited about the next question also.
Yeah. So another question from one of the participants. You know, not everything can happen in Millennium Park. I think I've had this conversation with all three of you. There are some things I would love to happen in Millennium Park, and there are a lot of things I would like to have happen elsewhere. But you know, thinking about the balancing that you all have to do, and that DCASE has to do, in looking at arts and culture programs citywide. You know, what goes in Millennium Park? What goes to the neighborhoods? What goes to other public spaces in the city? You know, what goes to the Riverwalk? What goes to the lakefront? Whatever that might be. Could you talk a bit about sort of how do you do that balancing process? What does that really start to look like in those conversations?
I can take this, and Maggie, maybe you can jump in. So we actually launched a new grant program this year in the middle of a pandemic, thanks in large part to you know, our fundraising capability, and it's called the Chicago Presents program. And so we're more intentionally, I think, trying to directly support you know, cultural activities in neighborhoods. Previously, you know, we had kind of smaller grant programs that attempted to do this, but this is, I think, the first time that we've kind of intentionally said, you know, here's a program to support, you know, cultural programs in neighborhoods this summer. The grants team has done a really extraordinary job at looking at who has access to our grant programs, especially in neighborhoods that we're looking to reach that don't have traditional infrastructure like museums or theaters. So we've expanded the eligibility criteria quite a bit to include social service and community-based organizations, partnerships like with SSAs and chambers of commerce, to really get the kind of programming dollars into neighborhoods. And we're seeing like extraordinary things come out of these neighborhood cultural presenters, like really innovative, high quality programming. So I think we recognize that talent is there in neighborhoods, and it just needs the support. So we're really kind of pivoting to be, you know, a significant grant maker in that space. I'll also say that this summer, we're going to deliver through the Chicago Presents program and also through neighborhood programs that we're curating directly, because we need to spread out the love for, you know, social distancing reasons. You know, we need the kind of smaller neighborhood parties so people have access, but we're not like overwhelming folks with crowds. So we're going to produce close to 100 programs in neighborhoods this summer, which is extraordinary. Either through this grant making opportunity or through the events that we lift ourselves. So it's a balance, but it's one that I think we're committed to and committed to understanding and in greater, you know, in greater detail going forward. Maggie, did I leave anything out?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, you know, I think that I will try my best not to fall into my sort of deep and abiding love for Chicago as a lifelong Chicagoan, Chicago proper Chicagoan. but I think that in the chat was a good point. You know, I live in a largely Latinx and financially underserved community neighborhood here in Chicago, and at least for my neighbors and our school district thing, like Millennium Park they don't feel that that is their space right now. I might be overly optimistic and thinking that it is still possible to get there, but I think that the commissioner and Aaron have really pivoted to ensure that everything that happens in Millennium Park itself, even the festivals or large scale events that take place there, have the ability to leverage those economic drivers back into local area communities. So through strategic partnerships working groups as a part of some of our year of initiatives, which are just sort of each year they highlight a different artistic discipline. But, you know, it allows us to take very standard practices. You know, there's after parties for Lollapalooza. That's not a new model, right? So leveraging the things that are happening at the park to then drive not just for the residents, but also for small businesses, for local area artists, and for the communities. It can really be both empowering, but also a really important economic driver to get those dollars out to the neighborhoods. And there's no better platform to do that than a park with the sort of iconic presence of Millennium Park.
Yeah, and Maggie, I think you're absolutely right. And I have you know, I'm a huge believer in, I think you and I've even talked about quite a bit, the sort of the economic cultural economy that can be developed around a place like Millennium Park, but it's not just for Millennium Park. It's not just for the downtown where Millennium Park is. It really is to elevate opportunity and create opportunity in Chicago's incredibly diverse neighborhoods. It's one of the huge, that is one of the huge assets that Chicago has, is the diversity of neighborhoods. And, you know, great place to either end or start things, arts and culture programs, is Millennium Park. You know, certainly. You know, Anne, I'm curious on your side of things, more facilities operational side. You know, kind of what challenges does the idea of you know, sort of balancing citywide versus a concentration at, say, a Millennium Park? What does that present?
Well, actually, I was flipping it for a little bit because I kind of feel that my part is evaluating what fits in Millennium Park and what doesn't fit in Millennium Park. You know, 3 to 5 years ago, you know, when we started kind of putting a lot of really large events into the park and really expanding from just the concert venue and turning it into a festival venue, because Millennium Park was quite frankly contained. And the idea of having that contained festival grounds was appealing. And it did a lot of wear and tear on the park. I mean, it was great to see these diverse crowds and have these unique events there. But this year, I mean, obviously last year, but we've, I think, been really doing an evaluation of that over the past couple years. And I'll give that to, you know, Aaron and the commissioner, and to really say, okay, well, how can Millennium Park be a showcase in part of a festival that's a neighbor, you know, throughout, you know, it's a week long throughout the neighborhoods. You know, we started this, I think our jazz festival has always been that way. And we have a world music festival that is actually really fantastic as well, that really had this idea of a, you know, 1 or 2 concerts or something along those lines in Millennium Park. But then, and I think Maggie was the one who mentioned it, you know, Lollapalooza, others have like all these performers that go to these clubs and these other venues who really should, not only do they need the revenue, but you're getting out into the neighborhoods, into these, you know, different areas for other people to experience it. You know, how do we do that? I mean, I'm happy because it means less money, quite frankly, for me to have to spend on larger events. But, you know, it really, I think in doing that really hard evaluation of what makes sense to be in Millennium Park, and being very, you know, intent and impactful on what type of programs are there so that they're still diversified, but then expanding those programs into the neighborhoods is really a direction that, and I think Maggie and Aaron talked about this a little bit, that we're going, that is a really good direction for DCASE and for the city to make sure it does expand. And hopefully somebody in Maggie's neighborhood who experiences World Music Festival or some other type of event there will maybe want to come to a culminating performance in Millennium Park ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I from the foundation's perspective, the introspection that has been shown by the DCASE team and thinking about Millennium Park in terms of less as a venue and more as a platform, jumping off point, a culmination point, has been really transformative for the space and for the purpose of the space, and really cuts right to the heart of that idea that really founded Millennium Park, and the idea of Millennium Park as a park for all Chicagoans. And I think that's been tremendous for the park. I know we're coming up on the hour, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So a bit of a final question, and it sort of touches on exactly what we've been talking about. This idea of balancing, Millennium Park is a tourism attraction. We know that. There's great value in that, particularly economic value. That's the old heads in beds in the hotels. It's that idea. How do you all approach balancing the tourism need that exists here for Millennium Park, that ultimately is an economic need, with the programming that you all want to see happen here in Millennium Park, which is very representative of Chicago, that is in a lot of ways curated for Chicagoans. Aaron, maybe if you want to start us off on that as some final thought.
Well, I mean, there's no question about it. I think tourism is incredibly important. It's incredibly important, for us directly, because we both generate the revenue and spend the revenue that's generated from tourism. So, it's important that we consider that. But I think that there is, certainly, and I think, our downtown with the pandemic especially, definitely needs that kind of reinvigoration and intention that Millennium Park can provide. But I think that is a much more comprehensive, strategy that we kind of need to start to adopt in terms of the role that the arts play and helping to strengthen and support, Chicago is bigger, right, than just Millennium Park, although that is, a very much a part of, one of the assets that we can use to, help drive that tourism. But it's a much bigger conversation in terms of, that, like, the arts generate, $3 billion in revenue every year in a typical year. So we need to also, I think, just raise the public's awareness, right, of the role that arts and culture plays in helping to support our city, the importance of arts and culture jobs, right? We're looking at a 40% unemployment at the height of the pandemic in terms of cultural workers that were unemployed. So I think we have a lot of advocacy work ahead of us, just to make sure that, people understand. And I think that they're in this particular moment in time, I think people is an extraordinary moment for the arts, because I think that the pandemic has also just kind of woke everybody up, right? And the loss of culture to what it really means to us. So it's an important moment for us to kind of capitalize on that. And I think really shift people's mindset in terms of their commitment to culture. And again, I think the city's investment, right, and helping to support and sustain culture in our city.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Aaron. I want to again be mindful of time, but I also don't want to cut Maggie or Ann off. Any parting thoughts on that that sort of same theme?
I do have one last word. Sorry, Maggie, if I'm taking over, but I actually, in trying to get over and experience the park as much as I can, I actually have to say that I find programming encourages tourism as much as the park itself. And it may not be intentional. I mean, you have people coming to Chicago because they want to come see Cloud Gate and they want to go, play in Crown Fountain, but then they'll stay to hear music because they've stumbled upon it. And I also don't want to put anything past our amazing programming. We have a lot of people that come to Chicago to hear a blues concert. We still have tourism coming for that as well. So there is kind of it's what makes Millennium Park so unique. You can come, you can see a movie, you can see music. Not only is this an architectural gem, but there are additional things to do as well that make you want to stay and, quite frankly, spend more money and get us more of that economic impact and stay in a hotel and come back the next day and experience again. So I don't want to put anything past that. I think that they actually are a good marriage. They go hand in hand.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Ann. Maggie, you get the final word. So
I feel like most everything has been covered. I will just add ice skating as a shout out to the challenge that is executing on the ice rink every year. But, it even keeps that tourism going through seasons that for those of us not living in more favorable climates have to face some quite significant challenges too. So just seeing it all as this sort of interactive ecosystem, one doesn't really work without the other and vice versa. And I think that that we do a pretty good job. Don't want to over credit us, but I think we do a good job of finding the balance between all of those.
And I would agree. I think that you all as a organization, DCASE, find an excellent balance with the need to use arts and culture as a tourism, as an economic development tool, but then also to not, as we were talking earlier, sort of grossly commercialize and therefore dilute the actual power of the arts and culture sector in Chicago. Certainly here in Millennium Park. So, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we are at the hour, actually just a minute or so over. I want to thank Maggie, Aaron, and Ann for their time today to speak to us a bit about arts and culture and Millennium Park here in Chicago. Speak a bit about the wonderful work Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events does here in the city of Chicago. So want to thank them for their time. I also want to thank our attendees for participating. Thank you to those of you who shouted out some questions for us. I think the conversation was certainly enlivened and deepened by those questions. So thank you. So with that, I think the webinar will come to an end. Thank everyone for their time and their participation. Thank you.